Do you have an absolute hatred of getting your photograph taken?
No, no. Well, I don't love it. Like,
Yeah. Well,
no.
I have to say, Steve Humphreys, who
Yeah.
has been so patient with me over the years,
Yeah.
because I don't like it.
No. You like taking other people's pictures, though, don't you?
I do. I like taking...
Somebody, no doubt, will comment.
I do like taking pictures of people, but yeah, I'm not... I hate standing and feel like I'm about to get shot in the face or something.
But I can't smile on the man. That's my real problem. Is I can't. I'm like, my kids
smile,
even
like
say, well, I can make a moody face. I can smolder, all right, but I can't smile on demand.
Oh, that didn't go to him. But Steve Humphreys has been very patient. And it's just... He's so pleasant and encouraging.
Yeah.
You're doing really well. You're doing so well. Sitting there shivering.
Yeah.
Anyway.
How are you going to seg into Aaron Brady's...
Let me just think about this for a second. How am I going to go into... Well, Aaron Brady won't be getting his photograph taken anyway, will he?
Well, that is actually accurate because it did actually hear in the court copy that Aaron Brady will not be eligible for parole until 2048. Because he's serving a life sentence for the murder of Garda Adrian Donoghue, but it's an unusual in that it's a capital murder case, so he's given a 40-year tariff with that.
2048 is another...
Well, that'd be he's entitled to apply for parole after 30 years of his sentence. So he was obviously convicted he went into prison in 2018. So he'll have to serve 30 years before he can apply for parole, which is obviously far more than most people who serve a life sentence in Ireland. I think the average is now something like 19 years before people get out. But because he was convicted of the murder of a Garda officer...
in the course of his duty.
In the course of his duty, there's a thing called a capital murder charge. Even up until... it was the last thing in which somebody could be sentenced to death for in this country before that was removed. But you can be given a tariff, and there is always a discussion and it may actually come to pass that people will be given a tariff like they are in the UK for life sentences, where you'll hear it in the North, for example, in cases we've covered where a guy could be given a 20-year minimum, but Aaron Brady has been given a 40-year term, and that means he can apply after 30 years. So it is
long way off. Now, Aaron Brady, there was a certain confidence around Aaron Brady and his support network on the outside, which we're going to talk about, that this appeal was going to be successful.
Yeah.
There was 50 grounds of appeal, and each one of them has failed before the courts of appeal, which is a 3-judge court.
It's a 3-judge court. There's a very lengthy written judgment. I think it's 363 pages, which I haven't gone through fully as at this minute. But the headline decisions are given there. I mean, I suppose a lot of the context of it, which you forget at the time, was that this case was conducted during COVID, during the lockdown, and that featured a lot. That determined how this case went ahead, and it features a lot in this judgment because of the unusual way, I suppose, that witness testimony was admitted to the court. In particular, there was a number of witnesses from the US who were allowed to give evidence over video link, which is quite uncommon. And not only were they allowed to give that evidence over video link, but they were also allowed to do so without supervision. So they were giving it from, they weren't in a court building.
No, they were at their homes sometimes at their laptop. And in the case of Molly Staunton, she gave testimony via video link from New York, and there was an interruption during her evidence by a man that wasn't seen, but she was told to stop basically, and the laptop was shut down.
Yeah, so this is one of the key issues of appeal.
Well, that was one of 50.
One of 50.
It was 1 point out of 50 points.
Yeah, and that related obviously to the lockdown. There was other issues then in relation to the fact that was the only case that continued. It was a very long trial. I can't remember the exact amount of time, but I think it was something like 5 or 6 months in total. And while the other courts were broke and didn't sit, this continued on, because once a case begins, obviously in this case it was a jury trial. You have a jury there, it's impaneled, and that was allowed to continue. That was also one of the grounds of appeal that it shouldn't have been allowed to continue. But some of the other grounds of appeal, and these were kind of numerous versions of sort of the same thing about phone evidence shouldn't have been admissible, CCTV shouldn't have been admissible, which are kind of maybe standard grounds for appeal, but they were all routinely rejected. I think some of the key bits of the appeal were to do with the Molly Staunton evidence, for example, and that interruption.
And Mr. Justice Edwards said, as regards this, in rejecting that ground as a reason for a retrial, he said that the interruptions that occurred did not represent a real and substantial risk of an unfair trial, which could not be avoided by directions of the trial judge, who carefully and properly addressed the jury on the issue and who had responsibility for the interruptions, acknowledged the absence of supervision and referred to the interruptions as being from the witness's boyfriend.
Yeah.
So in other words, he sort of flagged it to the jury and sort of said to them, this witness was not in a controlled environment and it was the boyfriend. And by recognising that, it's not grounds for a retrial.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose these are some of the key bits that can lead to a successful appeal. I think there's a recognition by the court, and I think it's said in this case that while it wasn't ideal or wasn't perfect, how this evidence was given, the courts can recognise that. But if the judge flags it up during a trial, explains it to a jury and says, you know, this is what you have to put, you have to hear this evidence in this context. Often when you get to an appeal, that is good enough. If a judge doesn't give that direction to a jury, that can lead to a successful appeal. In this case, the judges said that the jury were told about this context. It was explained clearly and fairly what was happening. They're entitled to make their own decisions having that knowledge. So it failed on that grounds.
So listen, Brady is 33 years of age.
Yeah.
And since he was convicted of the capital murder of Adrian Donahue, we can safely say that he has nailed his colours to this appeal, which his supporters on the outside have really claimed that everything was unfair in relation to Aaron Brady. His return from the US, his arrest over there, the trial, etc.
Yeah, the return also was rejected in the appeal, and that focuses on the fact that he wasn't extradited. It's kind of looking back, I actually had to double think that, because it feels like he was extradited, but he wasn't. What happened was he was illegally resident in the US and they deported him. And when he was deported back to Ireland. And obviously then he was arrested the moment he landed, or whenever he got on the plane, I'm not exactly sure. And so the defence, his barristers had said this was a de facto extradition. And if it had been an extradition, there would have been legal procedures in place. So again, that failed. So all of these things, obviously, as you said, have been flagged up in advance by the Brady family and the campaign they've run.
Yeah, and his father, Tony Brady, has been at the head, neck and tail of that campaign. There has been public protests. There has been online
regular
protestations of his innocence, and a confidence there, it feels, a confidence that he will be freed, that this has been an injustice, etc. It must be pretty devastating to now find out that all those 50 grounds of appeal have been rejected.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it is. I don't know how confident but they I suppose if you listen to some of the stuff that I think is called Justice for Aaron Brady, they have felt not only that they have proven their case is what they repeatedly say, and they've focused on. They
say they've proven that he is innocent.
Yes.
So they have a confidence in that.
They have a belief that has been proven, not just that it's up for question, but that they have proven it couldn't be him. So the campaign, no doubt, will go on, and I suppose there are further legal avenues. You can appeal to the Supreme Court.
Can you automatically do that?
No, the Supreme Court have to accept it, and the Supreme Court doesn't allow a retrial of the facts. It'll allow...
But can you automatically appeal the appeals court decision to the Supreme Court, or does the Supreme Court have to see within the appeals court that there could be elements questionable.
I mean, you can appeal it automatically.
You can appeal it automatically.
Whether the Supreme Court listen to it is another matter.
Whether they listen to it is another matter.
Yeah.
So they can reject the appeal.
Well, I think they can not hear
Court.
it. And the basis is that you have to raise, I suppose, a novel legal point.
Yeah.
So it has to be something to do with the law and how the law has been interpreted by the courts. You obviously can't, drag another witness in and something of that matter. So the Supreme Court is there to sort of clarify legal issues. And
so the Supreme Court, they will be looking towards that and the possibility, but the Supreme Court is coming at this from a conviction in the Central Criminal Court by a jury.
Yeah.
A rejection of 50 grounds of appeal by the Court of Appeal.
Yeah.
And they'll be asked to sort of essentially investigate the Court of Appeal's decision.
Yeah, probably not this decision in total, but some aspects of it. I mean, we don't know.
And the Supreme Court will have to decide whether or not it is acceptable or there is something there for them to look at.
Which would be a novel legal issue, if you know what I mean. So there could be some interpretation of the law.
Now, John Gilligan went all the way to the Supreme Court in his objections to decisions made in favour of the Criminal Assets Bureau.
Yeah.
And he did get all the way there. And then onwards to Europe, because that's your next stop, isn't it, if you fail at Supreme Court level?
Yeah, again, you can go to the European Court of Human Rights, which isn't part of the EU, but it's part of a European body. And again, it would
everything seems to go into that. It's like the black hole of Calcutta,
it does, but they don't hear lots of cases to do with Ireland. So you're not hearing hundreds of cases.
And you're waiting in a pretty lengthy queue, I'd say.
You are, but again, it would have to be something very specific. The Gilligan cab cases, I suppose, were the first. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were the first time the cab legislation obviously came in the aftermath of Veronica Guerin. It was tested then it was brought in by the Dáil, tested in the lower courts, and it went all the way up. So there was maybe issues that hadn't been seen by the higher courts.
Well, yeah, they would still sort of thank John Gilligan for actually making that legislation bulletproof almost, because he tested every little bit of it.
Yeah. So again, an appeal to the European Court of Human Rights would have to focus on something very specific. So we have seen people try to bring cases to the European Court of Human Rights to do with maybe the Special Criminal Court, whether that would be, considered to be fair and just. So Aaron Brady wouldn't automatically get heard there, but certainly this would be this Court of Appeal would be, if a case is going to be overturned, it'd be in this court that you would be most likely to see it. The Supreme Court obviously have overturned convictions, but to a far lesser extent. The Supreme Court here, obviously less cases. There's a lesser amount of judges than in a court of appeal, and it would be. Look, I can't think of the last time the Supreme Court overturned convictions. They obviously have on many occasions. But yeah, it'll be a long time again before you see the inside of that court for sure, one way or the other.
The murder of Adrian Donoghue happened in January of 2013 outside Lordship Credit Union, when a group of burglars as such, or ram raiders, were looking to steal the money that the credit union held. And the shooting, as described during the court case, was so unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, it was...
And quite random.
Yeah, I mean, there was a relatively small amount of money involved. Obviously, this gang arrived fully armed with a shotgun, prepared to sort of interrupt the cash delivery, was it? And, obviously...
Certainly movement of cash, and that's why they were there.
Yeah, and so the guards were there monitoring. Adrian Donoghue approached that car, judging something to be suspicious, and he was fired upon and died. I mean, it was a very shocking incident. Guards obviously have been killed in duty before, but it was a sort of very, very violent attack. Adrian Donoghue was a guy.
But it all happens, I suppose, in a few moments over something so trivial as the small amount of money it was. Yeah. And you look at the repercussions for years to come. Obviously, the widow of Adrian Donoghue and his children have to go on in life. 11, 12 years later, he's missing from their lives, and all that has entailed. But then the repercussions on those that perpetrated that crime, that moment when that gun was lifted and the trigger was pulled, Aaron Brady, he's been essentially on the run since then, out in the US, trying to forge a new life for himself, working albeit illegally. He is, evidence heard during the court case was that he used to get pissed up and boast about this.
Yeah.
And, he saw it as something to be, a badge of honour that he wore out there. And all that evidence came together. He's brought back to Ireland. He's put on trial, 33-year-old man, and he's not even eligible for parole until he's in his 60s.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shocking waste for everybody. Obviously, Garda Adrian Donoghue, I think it really struck a chord because he was kind of a sort of a guard that people only had high regard for, a very ordinary sort of hard-working detective, and for him to be gunned down in cold blood.
But he was a family man too, and he was a community man, and he was gunned down in his own community, literally across the road from where his children were going to school.
Yeah,
in his own
doing a kind
village.
of a routine job for the guards, not approaching anybody, in a circumstance where somebody felt they had to fire, or God only knows what would go through somebody's head in those circumstances anyway. But a real loss, a real senseless killing with huge impacts, and coming at a time when, guards are, increasingly suffering from that kind of abuse, really. But I mean, the Aaron Brady campaign has gone on ever since. People like Gemma O'Doherty have also attached themselves to that campaign, and sort of built up.
Do you know why? Sorry, Gemma O'Doherty has attached herself to that campaign.
I don't.
No.
I don't.
Gemma
know why.
O'Doherty, obviously previously a journalist, but went on to sort of attach herself to many different campaigns and has become. She was banned, I think, from Twitter, was she?
She was banned from social media things at times. But I suppose it's maybe an unusual thing to have a campaign involving somebody who's been convicted of murder. I mean, I can't really think of other cases. Obviously, there have been campaigns, and I suppose some of the inspiration for this campaign has come from, relative to other campaigns, to do with Republican prisoners. Aaron Brady's not a Republican, not connected with any Republican operation, but the campaign has been run, I suppose, along the lines that we've seen campaigns run for people that have been convicted of in relation to the IRA. But I don't think it's really struck a chord down here in the same way that some of those campaigns have done in the past up the north. So look, it's a blow. The family were there. Aaron Brady was there. This week to receive that judgment. It was reported that he showed no emotion, that some of his supporters were upset by the judgment. I do think you're right that they would have predicted that this was going to be an in the name of the Father moment. Maybe
I thought that's exactly what I was getting from it. Anyway, there was this absolute confidence that it's just a matter of time. This appeal is going to work. There was no question of it, and they believed. I'm just saying from their point of view, from what I can see, they believed totally that he was going to walk free, and they were going to carry him shoulder high back to Crossmaglen as an innocent man. And yet, when you hear the evidence in the trial, there was quite a lot of evidence. This wasn't a circumstantial case. There didn't seem to be any suggestion that this guy was fitted up. He had nothing to do with it, and that there was this state conspiracy against him.
Well, I think it would be considered a circumstantial case, but it's one of these cases that there's a web of. So, I mean, in Irish law, things have to be proven, obviously, beyond reasonable doubt, but you are allowed to convict somebody of murder, and many people have been, people like Joe O'Reilly, Graham Dwyer, in circumstantial cases, but the circumstances have to be able to build a web that is beyond the reasonable doubt. So you can't just convict, and a judge will describe this to a jury on one circumstantial piece of evidence, but if there's a net of circumstantial evidence that together builds this unbreakable proof.
And that evidence involved, vehicle tracking, phone evidence, witness statements about confessions alleged to have been given by him. There was a lot there.
There was a lot there.
And I mean, I don't know, having listened to it, and I interviewed our colleague as well, Robin Schiller, and he wrote a book about it. It felt like during that trial there was a very clear case. Sometimes you can't really see the clarity until you sort of sit back and put those pieces together, but it felt very clear.
Yeah, I mean, look...
and obviously the jury felt that.
Well, the jury did feel that, and I suppose the judges have said that as well, that, for example, the testimony of these witnesses was not perfect, but the jury it's described to them why it's not perfect, and then they make their own assessment. And at the end of the day... You'd
wonder to put yourself into the shoes of, obviously, his family.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can have some empathy with them because they have also lost somebody into the prison system, into this, imprisonment for the next 40 years of his young life. But what do you do, or where do you go? When do you give up? Can you ever give up? Do you have to keep campaigning? Do you have to keep posting social media videos? Where do you see it going?
Well, I think if you believed, if you have a child and you believe they've been wrongly convicted, when would you stop? You probably would not stop. And you have to say that people can believe things. And if you, love somebody and they're your child or you're part of your family, maybe you would be inclined to believe them, and therefore they can be acting sincerely, and be sincerely. But in this case, under Irish law, in the judgment of the jury and now of the appeals judges, they're wrongly convinced, and he is a guilty man. It's not. It has been proven, and we are able to say he is a Garda killer. I mean, that is now become a fact, I suppose. So, I mean, you have to have sympathy for them because it's a loss. And, if you believe that you've been wrongly treated, it must be, you can understand that they would seek to do what they could. But
I think mine, and I probably speak for you as well, sympathies really, truly lie with his widow and with his colleagues and his children, Adrian Donoghue's, but I just mean to try and see it from their shoes, that where do you go next? And
well, I think that
you constantly hope that you'll get to the Supreme Court, you'll get to the European Court of Justice, that you'll someday convince everybody else of what you're convinced of.
Yeah, and it's a thing where we see it all the time, actually, and I suppose people that are constantly in contact with newspapers, and they'll have a little bit of evidence maybe that they'll say this shows something to be untrue, but I suppose there's a broader picture, and that's what this judgment is saying. Obviously, there only is one victim really in this, and that is the family of Adrian Donoghue, who are left bereft. And obviously, these kind of campaigns that, people have a right to judicial processes, the right to appeal, the right to do all of that stuff. But yeah, it must be a burden as well for Adrian Donoghue's family to see this stuff constantly circulated on social media.
Absolutely. Okay, Niall, thanks a million.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.